I'm Paige Duncan. I'm the Planning Director for the town of Foxboro, and welcome back. We're here to talk about your favorite subject that I seem to talk about, which is housing. Please don't turn out. I know it can seem a little dry, and all of you probably have homes, so you think, what in the world do I need to talk about housing for? But actually in Foxboro, housing is a major issue. And I'd like to tell you why, and I'd like to ask you for your help right here. Just to let you know, Foxboro received a grant last year from the state of Massachusetts to prepare their housing production plan. You might have heard me talk about it. I've done a cable show with Jared Craig, and we've had a couple public forums. So we've been talking about housing a lot, and I know that some folks are kind of sick of it. Well, join the club. That said, we're getting close to the end, and we're getting to the fun part where we get to talk about solutions and strategies rather than issues and worries that we can't really do much about. So to start off, I just want to explain a little bit about what we've been doing. Like I said, we're doing a housing production plan. This is a state-mandated document that's meant to address housing issues in town. Every town has to do it, and that's why we were fortunately given a grant to do this. MAPC is our regional planning agency, and they've been brought on board to help us facilitate and draft this plan. They've been the ones acting as the consultant, doing public forums, interviews, and whatnot. You might have been contacted, you might have filled out a survey, or you might have gotten one of my many emails. If you haven't, please be sure to email me, pduncan@foxboroma.gov, to get on my mailing list, because you're not going to want to miss all this exciting news. On the housing production plan, what we've done so far is we've had a working group established. They've been meeting regularly. We've had a couple forums. The first forum was held in September of 2019. And the second was actually a panel discussion on small houses that was really well received. And that was held in February 2020. If you want to visit or see any of those forums, we actually recorded them for you, so you could go back and look at them. I've created a tiny URL. I don't know if you know what a tiny URL is, but what that means is when you have a long website, you can use what's called tiny URL and shorten it. So if you type in tiny URL, the letters url.com, and then /fox-housing, you'll end up at our page. We'll put a link up on that, and I'll have a link at the website, but I just want to let you know I'm trying to make it easy so you can go look at what we've done in the past so that you're ready for what we're doing now. All right, let me make this a little more interesting. Did you know that 34% of Foxboro households are low income right now? I bet you didn't know that. And that 55% of your elderly households are low income. So while we might all sit around and think that really there isn't a housing problem in Foxboro, these numbers don't lie. The senior population in Foxboro is expected to increase by 38% by 2030. And here's another thing I've heard. Foxboro doesn't want to grow, and we've heard that loud and clear. This housing plan is not meant to import a lot of new housing units or attract a whole new group of people. What we're trying to do is help the residents that are here now. We've heard resoundingly from the seniors that they have no place to go. They might live in a big house or a non-handicap accessible house. They'd like to buy something right here in town and stay with their community, and there's no place for them to go. So we've been heard loud and clear that Foxboro does not want to grow, and that is not the goal of this housing production plan. It is meant to truly figure out what we need now for the residents now, and maybe those that have left and want to come back. The median sales price of a single-family home increased since 2014, and it's gone up to $456,000. So your average home price right now, your median, should I say, is $456,000. I couldn't afford that. I don't know about you. And then a household earning Foxboro's median income, which is around $98,000, could afford a home costing about $345,000, but they could not afford your median income one. So what that shows is that the average income could not afford the average house. Another little fact is we've seen a lot of concerns about new building, and that 1/3 of the housing in Foxboro was built before 1960. So in the last 20 years, we've actually built less housing than we had done so altogether previously. So while it feels like there's a lot going on, it actually occurred a lot longer ago. So where are we now? We've been talking about this, we've been identifying issues, and right now is where we need the residents' inputs. Normally we'd hold a forum in town hall, and folks would come and we'd make a presentation, we might have surveys, and we'd do it that way. That was pre-COVID. Now that we have COVID, everything's gone online. So we are holding a virtual open house. The virtual open house has actually been open a couple weeks, and we're not getting a huge turnout. I realize housing can be boring, and it's kind of a drag during the summer to sit down and watch videos about housing. But you know what? They're actually pretty short. They're meant to be kind of interesting, and they're meant to make you think. So my first ask is that you go onto the town website and click on the virtual open house and participate. Take less than an hour, and that's what we're asking you to do. Knowing that not everybody has internet access and not everybody is computer savvy, we're going to work with cable access. They've been great through this COVID, and they're going to help us by putting the videos that are online on cable access so you can watch them here. So that's what this is. We're going to be showing you the videos that are currently at our virtual open house, and then we're going to ask you to provide input. We've divided them into 4 different categories, 4 different videos, and we have a survey for you to fill out. Right now the survey's online, but we also understand that might not work out. So if you can contact me, again, at the planning office, we can give you paper copies of the survey to fill out. We can email it to you, we can hot drop it off at your house, we can mail it, we will work with you. We very much want the public input on this. So that is my introduction to what we're doing here. I beg you to spend less than an hour and participate in this because it really is important to Foxboro. I don't live in town, so I don't want to affect this community in a way that the residents don't want. So please, residents, bring your friends and family, have it a watch party. Housing can be interesting. Let's do this and let's get this virtual open house done. You have about a week, so let's get it done. Okay, so let's get into these, I'm calling them modules, videos. We have 4 of them, and I'm going to get into the first one. Before I start, though, let me make an important point. The strategies you're going to hear, some of them will cost money and some of them will not. And we did this on purpose. We realize right now with COVID and budgets that now's probably not the time to be talking budget items. This plan, however, is a 5-year plan, so we didn't want to take things off the table just because they might cost money down the road. We want to lay out all the options up front. Many of them do not cost money, are really just regulatory, but we didn't want to discount the need for some that might cost money down the road. And I'll just caveat that we can still do things without spending money right now. So option 1, or module 1, has to do with housing options that could be less expensive than current development patterns. So we've heard from a lot of residents that the housing that's being built now is just too big. And when it's too big, it's just too expensive. So when you listen to this next module, you'll hear about cottage housing zoning, changes to the accessory dwelling unit or accessory apartment bylaw, and then smart growth or starter homes. None of those, I should just note, will cost money up front. Those are all regulatory changes that the market would hopefully respond to and result in a different housing pattern. So take a listen and let us know what you think about these housing options that might result in less expensive development. Thanks.
The first challenge we'd like these strategies to address is creating housing options that could be less expensive than current development patterns. We've heard from residents that new, detached, single-family housing has gotten bigger and more expensive over the years. In many cases, more expensive than many current residents could afford. The same goes for attached single-family homes, townhomes, and apartments. These high house prices are now reflected in land prices, meaning even some smaller, older homes can be quite expensive. Builders of new housing must pay high land costs and compensate by building large, expensive homes. It's a vicious cycle. We need to create ways to break that cycle, encourage types of housing that are smaller and less expensive. We're going to discuss 3 possible strategies that might help address this. One idea that we've explored is the creation of cottage housing. Cottages are smaller homes, typically 800 to 1,500 square feet. They're placed relatively close together and are arranged around a central green area with shared walkways, and sometimes a shared drive. These smaller homes would work very well for single people, older people looking to downsize, and new families. Now, in February, we held a panel discussion about small housing types, and cottage housing was one of the main topics of discussion. We heard a lot of support for cottage housing generally, along with plenty of healthy skepticism about how it would actually work. To build this type of housing, while making sure that cottage housing fits into the fabric of Foxboro, the town would need to amend its zoning bylaw. This would include a process to decide what cottage housing would need to look like, where it could be built, how infrastructure and parking would work, the process for approving a cottage development, and other details. The town would need to draft a bylaw reflecting those choices and bring it to town meeting for a vote. After a successful 2/3 majority vote, would cottage housing developments be allowed in Foxboro, and then it would be up to developers to actually build them. Another strategy is to amend zoning rules for accessory apartments, which are sometimes called accessory dwelling units, ADUs, granny flats, and in-law apartments. An accessory apartment is a small second home located on the same property as a larger single-family home. Sometimes they're carved out of a basement, sometimes they're additions to the main home, sometimes they're in another structure like above a garage or in a small new building. Foxboro currently allows accessory apartments, but only if they're attached to the main house. Only if the owner lives in either the main house or the ADU, and only if the occupant of the ADU is related to the owner of the main house. These restrictions make sense in theory, but they mean fewer people have applied to build an accessory apartment. The restrictions also mean that banks are reluctant to lend money to build these accessory apartments. Amending the accessory apartments bylaw would entail proposing changes to the current text of the bylaw that would encourage more accessory apartments. Such changes could include allowing non-family members to live in an accessory apartment or allowing accessory apartments that aren't attached to the main house. The planning board recently discussed some of these ideas for accessory apartment reform. Like any other zoning change, any proposals would ultimately require a 2/3 vote at town meeting to go into effect. The last strategy that we think would address this challenge is something called smart growth or starter home zoning. The state has two programs Foxboro could consider to encourage smaller, less expensive housing. Under both programs, a town plans for housing development that meets requirements set by the state, including a minimum amount of affordability. The town chooses a specific location and creates a detailed housing plan, including the density of housing, the type of housing constructed, like single-family homes versus townhomes versus apartment buildings, all of which are allowed under these programs. They would also choose specific site planning requirements. In addition to those, the town can develop design standards for the housing, specifying things like roof lines, window placements, and building materials. The housing density under the new plan must meet a minimum threshold set by the state. But other than that, the town has a lot of latitude to make its own decisions. Here are some examples of design guidelines for other such housing types. Once this plan is completed, zoning would need to be approved by a 2/3 majority at town meeting. If that zoning would go through, a developer could then build that housing by right, meaning without a special permit. But the developer must follow all rules set by the town during that process. Any new development is reviewed for its compliance with the plan the town has adopted. The state would also make payments to the town for the new housing, both after the zoning is adopted, something called a zoning incentive payment, which ranges between $10,000 and $600,000, depending on the net increase in allowed units. The town would also receive payments for each housing unit that gets a building permit. That's $3,000 per unit. The town would also become eligible for reimbursement by the state to the town for the cost of educating students who live in that new housing, according to a formula that the state sets. There's a number of other benefits, like a higher state match for new school buildings, consideration of this new zoning district when applying for other state grants, and consideration of the district if a town is opposing a 40B development. Foxboro can look into both smart growth and starter home options. It's important to note that the starter home housing can be lived in people at any stage of their life. The phrase starter home under this law just means a relatively small and dense single-family homes.
Okay, so I hope you learned a little bit about cottage zoning, accessory dwelling units, and starter homes. Please fill out the survey on that and let us know what you think of each of those strategies. Now we're going to get into ensuring that housing character is aligned with community character. What that means is we want new housing to fit with the community. That was something, as you know, Foxboro is very special and very unique, and people here are very protective about the character of the community, and we've heard that loud and clear. So we're proposing a few strategies that would address this concern. One has to do with redevelopment of historic buildings. I'll note that might cost money. A small housing rehabilitation fund, again, possible fund, and requires some money. A voluntary 40B process. Take a listen to that one because that's very interesting. You've all heard of 40Bs, but there's actually two different kinds. There's the 40B that a town has to accept because they're under 10%, or there's a 40B that the town of Foxboro can deal with because we're over 10%. And that's called a voluntary 40B, and it's a very effective way of creating affordable housing without a cost, and it's at the community's discretion. The town of Foxboro is in the driver's seat when it comes to 40B right now. And then lastly in this section, duplex design guidelines. This has to do with our R15 district. Right now we're seeing a lot of these small homes torn down and big buildings put up. Folks do not like that. So take a listen to the strategies here and let us know what you think. Thanks.
Now, the next challenge we want to address is ensuring that new housing aligns with the existing community character in Foxboro. One issue members of the community discussed is the design and character of new developments in town. Some people felt that new development didn't match Foxboro's suburban nature, its older architecture, and its blue-collar and middle-class history, which the community believes are important features of the town's character. The community was concerned about the impact of new large homes, as well as the design of apartment buildings, changing the character of Foxboro. We're going to ask you to consider 4 strategies that might help ensure new housing is aligned with Foxboro's existing community character. The first of these is redevelopment of historic buildings. So, one way to ensure that new housing fits in with the existing community character is by redeveloping historic buildings that already exist in town. When we talk about historic redevelopment, we typically mean buildings that were historically used for other purposes. Foxboro has some experience with historic redevelopment at the Foxboro State Hospital property. Places like the vacant State Hospital Auditorium, as well as the old Pratt School, are examples of places that could potentially be housing if redeveloped in the future. However, historic reuse projects are usually more complicated than building new construction. They can be costly to redevelop, and sometimes they need additional resources in order to make those projects financially feasible. Foxboro could facilitate historic redevelopment by studying historic sites, marketing those sites to developers, and providing assistance depending on the project needs. It's important for the town to establish a process to identify and prioritize historic sites and buildings early to allow time for intervention and possible improvement. Once potential developers are seeking a permit to tear down a building, the opportunity to preserve them has usually passed. The next strategy we want you to consider is a small housing rehabilitation fund. Now, in addition to large historic sites not traditionally used for housing, Foxboro has lots of relatively old, relatively small homes in need of rehabilitation. Many of these homes are 1 or 1.5 story bungalows built in the mid 20th century, and they've been an important part of Foxboro's housing stock ever since. Now, many of these older homes need substantial renovation. These aren't just cosmetic changes, but health and safety issues. In some cases, a bank wouldn't give a normal home buyer a mortgage for one of these homes because it's in such rough shape. Instead, these smaller homes are either rehabbed and sold at the highest price possible, or they're torn down entirely and replaced by a new larger home or a duplex. In any case, Foxboro has lost that inexpensive home which historically served residents well. The town could intervene in this process by creating a loan fund specifically for rehabbing small homes. This fund would offer short-term loans to provide for modest renovations, including bringing the property up to code. In exchange, the town would require the home be sold at an affordable price to a buyer with a modest income. Implementing this in Foxboro would require capital funds to start the loan fund, as well as the capacity to administer the program, either the capacity of town staff or through a nonprofit partner. Now, another strategy to consider is something called a voluntary 40B process. One surprising tool that towns have to build housing, which fits in with the community, is something called this voluntary 40B process. Many people in town have probably already heard of Chapter 40B, a state law which is very controversial in Massachusetts. The law is meant to get towns to build affordable housing. So in towns with less than 10% affordable housing, developers with affordable units can ignore the town's zoning rules. This is called an involuntary 40B process, and it's why the law is famous or infamous. When less than 10% of Foxboro's housing counted as affordable, several involuntary 40B projects were developed. Those projects tipped the town above the 10% threshold, meaning that involuntary 40B developments are no longer possible in Foxboro. Developers must follow the town's zoning, according to the law. But now that Foxboro is above the 10%, the town can set the terms of a 40B process and partner with a developer on a less than well-known voluntary 40B development. In this way, 40B becomes a tool in the town's zoning toolbox rather than a punishment inflicted on the town. Voluntary 40B can help the town pursue the type of development it wants, and it can deny a project that doesn't meet the town's needs. Voluntary 40Bs, such as this one pictured here, have another benefit of putting more housing onto the state's list of affordable housing units, meaning these voluntary projects reduce the chance that Foxboro would drop below that 10% affordable housing threshold and be vulnerable to those involuntary 40Bs again. The last strategy here that we'd like you to consider is duplex design guidelines. Throughout this process, we've heard from some residents about the issue of duplex development. According to Foxboro zoning bylaw, you are allowed to build a 2-family home in some parts of town, an area mostly around Foxboro Center. This area is called the R15 district in the zoning bylaw, and it's called out here in red hatch on this map. In general, duplexes are a good thing for towns, since they can provide relatively small housing units that can be more affordable to young people, single-person households, new families, and empty nesters. However, in Foxboro, small bungalows replaced by large duplex houses, where each unit is much larger than the original home and is priced relatively high. What's more, some people feel these new homes are out of character with the rest of town. One way to address these issues is through design guidelines. These are rules about specific design details that go above and beyond the rules you find in zoning bylaws. They can include building mass and scale, garage design, roof line design, window placement, building materials, and more. Here are some examples of design guidelines. The town could adopt design guidelines specifically for duplex development and then adopt a rule in the zoning bylaw that requires new duplexes to follow those guidelines. By following specific design rules, new duplexes would feel more in character with the rest of town.
Okay, curious to hear what you thought about that set of strategies. Next, we're on to increasing resources dedicated to affordable housing and housing issues generally. This would result in deed-restricted housing, affordable housing, and so we want you to listen to these strategies. This would include something like an inclusionary zoning, and they'll explain what that means. I'm not going to get into it too much, but that's a non-financial commitment. Community Preservation Act, we're going to talk about that. You've heard about that in other areas. I know it can be used for open space, historical, and housing. That does cost money, so obviously that's a major conversation there, but many communities have done a lot of great work in not just housing, but in a lot of elements with the CPA funds, so it's worth considering. Looking at housing authority capacity, that's something we're looking at up on Walnut Street. Reform the Affordable Housing Trust. Right now Foxboro has one, but the way it's set up isn't quite consistent with most communities in the way it's designed. And then lastly, sharing a regional housing services office. This would cost money and it would result in a new position. So we're not trying to hide that, but we're also proposing that it wouldn't be needed anytime soon, and it would be something that could be shared amongst a bunch of communities, because all the communities around us are in the same boat. So take a listen, and please let us know what you think. Thanks.
Deed-restricted affordable housing is the most certain way to ensure affordability as housing prices go up due to increased regional demand. Affordable housing is typically available to households with incomes of 80% or less than the regional median income, or AMI. That means that a family of 4 with a combined income of $89,200 or less would qualify. A single person would qualify if they earn about $62,500 or less. Many of the strategies discussed in other sections of this plan aim to make unrestricted, unsubsidized housing less expensive for the average Foxboro resident. But the town should also work to increase its stock of deed-restricted units for Foxboro residents who need it. The following strategies are ways that the town could encourage more deed-restricted affordable housing. First, by increasing housing authority capacity. Like many towns in the area, there are more Foxboro residents who are in need of affordable housing than there are affordable housing units in town. To help address this need, the town and the Housing Authority have been working towards adding Housing Authority units on the 16 acres of land located at the corner of Walnut Street and Route 140, or Commercial Street. Last year, the town was awarded a Housing Choice Capital Grant for $247,000 to provide infrastructure support for the proposed development of up to 250 new affordable housing units on those 16 acres, as well as the renovation of 12 existing Housing Authority units in the Walnut Terrace development. These capital funds will be used to design a sewer extension to the Housing Authority site and to design the signalization of the Commercial and Walnut Street intersection. By preparing the site and continuing to plan for and eventually build additional Housing Authority units, the town will create an important new affordable housing opportunity for seniors who might not otherwise be able to stay in town. Another strategy to consider is inclusionary zoning. Not all affordable housing needs to be part of a standalone affordable housing development. In fact, in many towns, private developers are required to make a portion of any new development available as affordable housing. These rules are often called inclusionary zoning. Inclusionary rules typically only apply to projects above a certain size, so small projects aren't impacted. The inclusionary zoning can apply whether the project is a subdivision with a single-family homes or one multifamily building. The proportion of units that must be kept affordable is usually around 10 or 15% of all units. Usually the affordable housing is required to be on the same site as other units in the development, but in some towns, developers can build affordable housing elsewhere or can simply provide a one-time cash payment to the town to be used for affordable housing. Some towns provide something in exchange for the affordable housing to offset the cost, such as a density bonus or relief from certain subdivision requirements. To pass an inclusionary bylaw that works in Foxboro, the town would start with a real estate study. Findings from that study would inform what rules the town would need to set, and a bylaw implementing those rules would need to pass at town meeting to go into effect. Another strategy to consider is the Community Preservation Act. One important tool that many towns use for housing purposes is the state's Community Preservation Act, or CPA. This law gives towns the option to create a new source of revenue that is earmarked specifically for projects that enhance and preserve communities. CPA brings two new revenue sources. The first is a surcharge on the property tax, typically between 1 and 1.5%. The second is a state match on funds, which varies from year to year. CPA funds can be used for open space and recreation, for historic preservation, and for affordable housing. At least 10% of the funds must be spent in each of these three categories, and the remaining funds can be used towards any one of these three funding categories. Any new tax on property owners is a big deal, and local CPA adoption can create exemptions for low-income residents, low and moderate-income seniors, commercial property in some cases, and for the first $100,000 of property value. Town meeting would have to adopt CPA, including these exemptions. CPA is one of the major ways that Massachusetts towns fund community improvements, including affordable housing. Without it, there are very few dedicated funds for affordable housing purposes. Another strategy to consider is to reform the Affordable Housing Trust. An affordable housing trust is a special purpose part of town government that collects money for affordable housing and spends that money to facilitate affordable housing production or preservation. The basic framework for an affordable housing trust is set by state law. Housing trusts can be funded through the town's general budget, through the Community Preservation Act, or by developer payments under inclusionary zoning rules. Foxboro has an affordable housing trust already. The trust was organized during the state hospital redevelopment to hold a payment by the developer that was earmarked for affordable housing. This is a great start. Right now, major functions of the Affordable Housing Trust require approval by Board of Selectmen. This works for now, but it would be unusual for a more active housing trust. If Foxboro wants to be more proactive about its spending on housing, about getting new revenue sources for affordable housing, and about finding new ways to create affordable housing, the town should reform the Affordable Housing Trust to be more flexible, along the lines of how most other trusts in the state operate. And finally, the town could consider a regional housing services office. Smaller towns often lack the staff capacity to administer affordable housing programs effectively. The town must monitor expiration of affordability restrictions, compliance with those restrictions, and administer programs in accordance with state and federal law. Simply having enough staff time available is a barrier to implementing new programs, especially programs that encourage small-scale, scattered-site affordable housing. Monitoring units is particularly important in making sure that the town stays above the state's 10% affordable housing goal. One way that smaller towns can overcome this barrier is by working with other towns in the area. Together, these towns can form a regional housing services office that would more efficiently use available resources for administering housing programs and monitoring compliance. Foxboro could study the costs and benefits of starting a regional housing services office with other towns in the area. To let us know what you think about any of these strategies, please answer the survey questions below this video.
Okay, thanks for that. Curious to hear what you thought of the last segment. Now we're into our fourth module, and this has to do with decreasing costs associated with staying in your own home. We've heard a lot from seniors, and many of them are in their single-family home that isn't designed for senior living. They would love to move somewhere else, to downsize into a smaller unit, and we just don't have it. And the market just isn't building it. The land costs are just too high, and therefore the housing that gets built is just too big and too expensive. So we've been taking a look at what strategies we could do to address that. One of the ones that you're going to hear coming up next is maintenance assistance for low and moderate income residents. That's something that would cost money, so we're not going to lie to you there. Senior property tax exemptions. There is some program out there now, but it could be expanded. Again, it would cost more money. And those are the main ones we're looking at that as well. We've also been working with the seniors to help them grow or sort of create a village-to-village network, which is basically a grassroots private network, not a town network, that would support seniors and provide support to seniors staying in their home. So take a listen, let us know what you think, and we'd love to hear from you. Thanks.
One issue we've heard about housing in Foxboro is the challenges associated with being able to stay in your current home, especially for folks on fixed incomes. Here are some strategies that can address that challenge head-on. The first is maintenance assistance for low and moderate income residents. Costs associated with maintenance and safety upgrades can be a big impediment to people staying in their homes. For example, seniors might be able to age in place if their home was renovated to have a ramp to the front door or a master bedroom and bathroom at ground level. For everyone, safety improvements could include accessibility features, removing lead paint, or other measures that make a home more viable as life circumstances change. Foxboro could offer a low-cost loan program to low and moderate income residents to make these projects more affordable and allow residents to stay in their home. The program would require capital funding to start the fund, as well as capacity to administer the loans, either through town staff or a nonprofit partner. Once the fund is started, it would be replenished as folks repay their loans. A second strategy to consider is senior property tax exemptions. Property taxes are a particular hurdle for people on fixed incomes, including seniors. As property values rise, taxes go up. And while these residents will benefit from the rise in property values when they eventually sell their home, the increased values don't bring any benefit if you want to stay in your home right now. The increased taxes, however, can be difficult to afford. Foxboro has already implemented measures to ease the tax burden on seniors. Income-eligible seniors can get a $1,000 exemption on property taxes, and they can delay their tax payments. In some cases, seniors can even trade the town volunteer hours for property tax relief up to $1,500. While these programs offer some help, we've heard from residents that more help is needed. The town could explore new ways to provide tax relief to seniors and to others on fixed incomes. A final strategy to consider is senior support networks. Villages are nonprofit membership organizations that have become a key resource for older residents who want to age in place. The village concept provides support for the functional, medical, emotional, and social needs of older adults. Some folks in town have already been thinking about how to start something like this here in Foxboro. Residents themselves create village networks to help coordinate and deliver services and supports within their communities. They're funded through membership fees and donations. Volunteers or staff can provide assistance with transportation, light housekeeping, and other tasks that help members live at home safely. Villages can also plan social or wellness activities. They're run by volunteers, not the town, so this is more of a grassroots strategy. To let us know what you think of these strategies, please answer the survey questions below this video.
Okay. So the last one I'm going to talk about here is called best practices that the town will advance. These are less, shall I say, controversial in the sense of these are almost the no-brainers. These are the things that we're probably going to do regardless of input. Talks about continued support of the Housing Coalition, create an implementation committee for the housing plan, build relationships with nonprofits, apply for grants, monitor state housing programs. So those are kind of the low-hanging fruit that your planning staff's going to be doing no matter what. But I did want you to be aware that there are some ongoing strategies that are listed that we do plan on and going after no matter what. So stay tuned and give us your opinion on that if you have any. Okay, so you've hopefully listened or watched all the modules now, and you're feeling really up to speed on housing. Now what we need you to do is fill out the survey. It is available online, but we've heard from some people that going online isn't the easiest. So what we're doing is making paper copies of the survey available. It's going to be available at Town Hall. You can email me at pduncan@foxboroma.gov. We'll put that up for you. You can go on the town's website. There's a link there. And I know the Senior Center is going to be working with us. So basically reach out. We will get you this survey if you cannot do it online. We very much want to hear from you. But we're going to put this up online now, the links to get to the virtual open house. Since the virtual open house opened, we've actually created one more document that should have gone live this morning, and that was a little bit of more explanatory information. We couldn't link it to the survey because once you do a survey, you don't want to touch it again. Therefore, we're sending folks over to the MAPC housing page right now so that you can see all of the information available. And so if you haven't been staying up to speed on this project, please go visit it, take a look at what we've been doing. Again, take a look at these modules and let us know what you think. Even if it's not in the survey, send me an email. Anyway, we want to hear from you folks. I really appreciate your time. Email me anytime on this housing issue or any other planning topics. Thank you very much and have a great day.